The city never sleeps. Its breath is smoke, its heartbeat the rhythm of engines and restless feet. Between towers that touch the clouds and alleys where whispers hide, life moves fast, too fast to remember where it began. Yet beneath all that noise lies silence, old, patient, and waiting. At the city's edge stands the old cemetery, hidden behind rusted gates and bent iron crosses. Its cracked tombs sit like forgotten elders, watching the living hurry past. The air there feels thick, not from dust but from memory. The young call it a cursed place, but the old know it as sacred ground. A resting place for those whose stories once shaped the land. Long ago, when the city was still a cluster of clay homes, this ground was alive with prayers and songs. People brought food and water to the graves, whispering the names of ancestors so they would never fade. But time grew greedy. Towers rose where palm trees stood, and the living forgot to bow. Now only weeds grow over the names, and the air tastes bitter with neglect. They say the dead grow lonely when the living stop remembering. Some who walk past the gate claim to feel unseen eyes watching. Others hear faint whispers like breath against the wind, not angry but longing. Still, no one dares to stop, except Tamba. At 28, he walks through life with a swagger that comes from thinking the world owes him nothing, and he owes it nothing in return. A mechanic by trade, he spends his days covered in grease and his nights chasing pleasure in the city's loud corners. His laughter is sharp, his pride louder. To him, the stories of his mother, tales of spirits, curses, and ancestors, are relics of a forgotten time. Old superstitions, he says, whenever Mama Kesa warns him to show respect. The dead don't care, Ma. They had their time. Mama Kesa only sighs, her eyes tired from praying for a son who no longer believes. The earth remembers, Tamba, she tells him, even when you do not. But her words slide off him like rain on metal. That night, the city hums with celebration. Music spills from bars, laughter rises from every corner. Tamba and his friends stumble down a narrow street, drunk on both beer and youth. The moon hides behind clouds, ashamed of what it sees. Let's take the shortcut through the cemetery, one of them slurs. Unless you're scared of the dead. The others laugh, and Tamba grins, proud as ever. Scared? Of bones and dust? Please! They push open the rusted gate, its scream echoing through the night. Inside, the air changes, heavier, colder. The city's noise fades behind them, replaced by silence that feels alive. Tamba raises a bottle, mocking the stillness. To the forgotten, he shouts, pouring beer onto a cracked tomb. May they rest well while we live better. His friends laugh nervously. One mutters, "Let's go, man." This place gives me chills, but Tamba only laughs louder. He stumbles toward another grave, unzipping his trousers in drunken arrogance. Let the dead have a drink too, he jeers. Stop that. His friend hisses. That's madness. Tamba smirks, the moon finally peeking through the clouds to catch his foolish act. The wind rises, howling through the graves as if 1,000 whispers speak at once. The bottle slips from his hand and shatters. For a brief moment, the laughter dies. The air feels wrong, like something has awakened. One friend grabs his arm. Let's go, Tamba. Tamba shrugs him off, forcing a smile, but his voice trembles. You all are just scared of shadows. As they stumble out, the gate slams shut behind them with a clang that echoes through the city's sleeping streets. And somewhere deep in the cemetery, under the cracked earth and forgotten names, something stirs. The moon hung low, pale as bone, over the forgotten cemetery. The air stood still, carrying the faint smell of dust and decay. Tamba staggered between cracked tombstones, laughing so hard his chest ached. His friends trailed behind, their laughter fading into uneasy murmurs as the wind shifted. Let's go, man, one of them whispered. This place? It's not right, Tamba turned, his grin wide and defiant. What's not right? These graves? He kicked a loose stone, his voice dripping with mockery. The dead should thank me for visiting. He stopped beside a weathered grave, its name half-eaten by time. The marble was cool under the moonlight, the silence pressing on all sides. His friends pleaded again, voices trembling. Don't do it, Tamba, let's just go. But pride had always been Tamba's poison. He unzipped and laughed, urinating on the grave like it was nothing more than a patch of dirt. Let them have a drink. After all, the dead must be thirsty from lying around all day. The sound of trickling water echoed louder than it should, unnaturally loud, bouncing off the tombs like mocking laughter. Then, without warning, the wind shifted. It came cold and sharp, cutting through their drunken haze. The trees around the cemetery swayed, though no storm had come. Tamba froze, his grin faltering. A low growl echoed, not from any man, but from the night itself. On a nearby tomb sat a black cat, its eyes gleaming like molten gold. It stared straight at him, unblinking, unmoving. "Ah, Tamba!" one friend cried out. "Let's leave now." But Tamba, still clinging to his arrogance, forced a smirk. "It's just a cat, boys. Dead men don't fight." The cat's tail flicked once, twice, and then it vanished into the shadows as if swallowed by the darkness. His friends ran, their footsteps slapping against the path. Only Tamba remained, chuckling weakly to prove to himself he wasn't afraid. But deep inside, something ancient had already taken notice. As he stumbled toward the cemetery gate, the sound of a broom scraping against stone broke the silence. An old street sweeper, his back bent like a bow, was cleaning the path. His hands trembled, yet his eyes burned with knowledge. "The dead hear more than the living," the old man muttered, his voice dry as sand. Tamba paused, smirking. "Then let them listen." The old man looked up, his eyes hollow with warning. But Tamba was already walking away, his laughter swallowed by the city's noise. Behind him, the wind rose again, this time carrying whispers that didn't belong to the living. High above, the city lights flickered once. The night exhaled, heavy and watchful. The cemetery sank back into its silence, but under the grave Tamba had mocked, the earth shifted softly, like something beneath was breathing again. Morning came. The city's roar returned, horns, chatter, and engines blending into chaos. Tamba groaned awake in his small apartment, his head pounding from the night's drink. He rubbed his eyes and laughed, remembering his foolish act. "Imagine," he muttered, "fearing old bones." But when he turned to the mirror, the laughter died on his lips. His reflection looked back, a second too late. It blinked after him, moved after him, smiled after him. He stepped closer, touching the glass. The reflection did the same, but the delay was still there, unnatural and wrong. "What in the world?" he whispered. He shook his head hard, forcing a laugh. "Maybe I'm just hungover." But as he splashed water on his face, the sound didn't come right. It echoed like something deep, hollow, as if another world were listening. At the garage that day, strange things began to happen. Wrenches clattered from shelves without being touched. Bolts rolled across the floor in slow, deliberate circles. The air was thick, charged, heavy with something unseen. One of his co-workers glanced at him nervously. "Tamba, did you touch the spirits last night?" He snapped. "Spirits? Don't start that nonsense with me." But when the hammer dropped from the workbench and landed perfectly upright beside his foot, no one spoke again. The silence that followed was sharper than the noise. Later, walking home past the cemetery, Tamba heard something that made his skin crawl. Whispers. Soft, broken voices carried by the wind. At first, he thought it was traffic or echoes of passing strangers. But then he heard his name, Tamba. He stopped. The air turned cold. Dogs nearby began barking wildly, their eyes wide, their fur bristling as they backed away from him. He tried to speak, but his throat tightened. The whispers grew faint again, melting into the city's hum. Yet, as he turned the corner, he could still feel eyes on him, watching, waiting. That night, long after the city had gone to sleep, Tamba's mirror shivered. For a heartbeat, it no longer showed his face, but another. The face of an old man dressed in burial white, staring back at him with eyes that never blinked. Mama Kisa's nights grew longer than the days. The air in her small house felt heavy, thick with the scent of burning oil and fear. She could not explain it, but she felt something following her son, a shadow that did not belong to the living. Every time Tamba walked out, her heart tightened like a knot being pulled by invisible hands. In her dreams, she saw bloodied water flowing under his feet, faces without eyes staring from the darkness, and an old man's hand resting on Tamba's shoulder. One night she woke up trembling, her rosary clutched so tight it cut into her palm. "Ancestors, guard my son," she whispered, her voice cracking like dry wood. "Do not let him walk where spirits drink from the earth." But the room stayed silent, her prayers swallowed by the still air. Somewhere beyond her walls, a dog howled at nothing, and she knew the dead were awake. At nothing, and she knew the dead were awake. The next morning she confronted Tamba. Her voice shook, but her eyes were steady. "My son, you must go to the pastor. Or to Bambo the healer. Something dark follows you." Tamba frowned, his hands greasy from the car engine he was fixing. "Mama, stop with your village talk. These are tales for people who fear the wind." She reached for him, but he stepped back, anger flashing in his eyes. "You think your prayers can fix everything? This is the city, Mama. Here, we fix engines, not spirits." Her lips trembled, tears rolling down her face. "There are things that fire cannot melt and steel cannot repair," she whispered. But he turned away, grabbed his jacket, and walked out. The door slammed behind him, echoing through the house like thunder. In the silence that followed, Mama Kisa fell to her knees. "Oh, ancestors," she wept. "If he will not listen to my voice, let him hear yours." Outside, the wind stirred, slow and watchful. That night, Tamba woke to a soft dripping sound. At first, he thought it was the leaky pipe again, but the rhythm was too slow, too deliberate. Drip, drip, drip. He sat up, heart pounding, and followed the sound. When he reached the door, his breath caught. Wet footprints trailed across the floor, large, bare, and glistening under the dim light. They led straight to his bed, and stopped where his shadow began. "Who's there?" he shouted, his voice shaking. The room answered with silence. Then the air grew cold, his skin prickling. He stumbled back into bed, pulling the blanket up, but sleep dragged him under like a hand around his throat. In his dream, an old man stood over him, wrapped in burial cloth, eyes like deep wells of sorrow. "You watered my grave," the spirit whispered, voice dry as dust. "Now your soul must dry." Tamba tried to speak, but no words came. The old man's hand reached for his chest, and he woke up screaming, drenched in sweat. The dripping continued, steady as breath. The days that followed turned cruel. Tamba's body began to betray him. His once strong arms grew weak, his lips pale and his breath shallow. He felt a chill that no sun could chase away. Even under the burning heat of noon, he shivered, wrapping himself in jackets like armor. His coworkers stared. "You sick, Tamba?" one asked. He forced a smile. "Just tired." But his hands trembled as he spoke, his fingernails turning grayish as if frost had crept into his blood. No medicine helped. No food brought strength. At night he sat awake, watching his breath fog the air inside his room. He began to wonder if the warmth of life itself was slipping away from him, one heartbeat at a time. Soon the city that once sang to him grew silent. The horns, the chatter, the laughter, all faded into nothing. Tamba walked through the streets like a ghost among the living, watching people's mouths move without hearing a sound. Even his own footsteps seemed distant, like echoes from another world. He shouted once, just to prove he could still be heard, but his voice vanished before it reached the air. "Why can't I hear you?" he whispered to a woman passing by, but she only looked confused and walked faster. The silence pressed against him, thick and suffocating. For the first time, he understood what his mother had feared, that something unseen had taken hold of him, pulling him slowly toward the other side. His friends noticed the change before he did. His eyes looked sunken, his voice hollow, and his laughter, once loud enough to shake the walls, now carried no life. They whispered among themselves, afraid to say it aloud. "He's been touched," one murmured. "By spirits or something worse." One by one, they stopped visiting the garage. Calls went unanswered, drinks remained unshared, and Tamba was left alone with the voices that had begun to whisper at night, soft, wet sounds that slid into his dreams. When he looked into mirrors, his reflection seemed slower again, eyes watching him like they belonged to someone else. He sat in that silence, trembling, realizing too late that the city he loved had turned its back on him, and the dead he mocked had not. Mama Kessa's heart could no longer bear the sight of her son fading like smoke in the wind. His eyes were hollow, his laughter gone, and his body trembled as if something unseen was drinking his strength. One morning, before the sun fully rose, she wrapped her shawl tightly and whispered, "If my son will not seek help, then I will drag his spirit there myself." She guided Tamba, weak and shivering, through the crowded market to Auntie Shuma's house, a place where fear and respect walked hand in hand. The air there smelled of herbs, ashes, and secrets too old to be told aloud. Cowrie shells glistened on the ground like moons fallen from the sky. Auntie Chuma sat cross-legged, her eyes sharp and knowing. Without a word, she waved them in. "The ancestors have been waiting," she murmured, her tone thick with something between warning and pity. When the shells hit the mat, they danced like bones with purpose. Auntie Chuma's eyes rolled back, her voice deepening until it sounded like many voices speaking as one. "You angered the spirit of a man who was buried without peace," she declared. Tamba's breath caught. His grave was not yours to mock. The air grew heavy, pressing against their lungs. "He waits for payment before the next full moon. If his honor is not cleansed, he will claim what he was denied." Tamba's lips trembled. I didn't mean harm." Auntie Chuma's eyes opened sharply. "The spirit knows no jest. You watered his grave with shame. Now he thirsts for justice." Mama Kessa fell to her knees, weeping into her wrapper. "What must we do?" she cried. The woman looked toward the window where the wind whispered. "Prepare your heart for truth," she said. "Some debts cannot be washed with water, only with repentance." From that day, darkness followed Tamba like a second skin. The city that once glittered before him now dimmed like dying embers. Every dawn felt colder than the night before. The walls began to whisper, soft at first, then louder, voices rising like a storm behind his ears. Shadows stretched when he moved, and even under the sun, his world was cloaked in twilight. His body weakened. His laughter, once full of pride, turned hollow. He could no longer tell if he was among the living or walking with the dead. Fear took root where arrogance once bloomed. The city lights flickered around him like candles at a funeral, each one fading as though mourning his slow descent into darkness. Soon, strange things began to cling to him. No matter where he went, grave soil followed, under his nails, in his shoes, even on his pillow when he woke. He washed and scrubbed until his hands bled, but the scent of wet earth refused to leave. It hung in the air, heavy and unrelenting, reminding him of the night he mocked the dead. When he touched water, it turned cloudy and brown, like the muddy graves of the forgotten. "What is happening to me?" he whispered, staring at his trembling hands. But the water only rippled, showing him no reflection, only the color of his sin. He began to feel buried, even as his chest still rose and fell. It was the mirrors that broke him. Each morning, when he looked into one, the face staring back was not his own. It was older, wrinkled, pale, and full of sorrow. The eyes were deep, hollow, and accusing. "Why?" the reflection seemed to ask, lips moving though no sound came. Tamba stumbled back, screaming. He smashed one mirror after another, but every shard still showed the same face, the face of the man from his dreams, the one whose grave he had desecrated. The spirit no longer haunted him. It lived within him, breathing through his body, seeing through his eyes. He stopped looking at his reflection altogether, afraid of what might look back. Desperation drove Mama Kessa once more to Auntie Chuma. The woman gathered the city's elders, lighting incense that filled the room with a choking mist. The cowries rolled again, clattering like rain on a coffin. Auntie Chuma's eyes turned distant, her voice low and trembling. "The grave belonged to a Koro," she said. "A night watchman falsely accused of theft. He was buried in shame and forgotten by those he guarded. His spirit wandered, unseen, until your son's laughter woke him." The elders bowed their heads in silence. Mama Kissa's tears fell onto the floor, mixing with the ashes. Auntie Chuma continued. Okoro seeks justice, not vengeance. If his name is cleansed, the curse will rest. But if the city forgets again—" Her words trailed off as the flame before her flickered and went out. The room grew cold, and the elders knew this was no ordinary haunting. It was a reckoning. The room was silent as Auntie Chuma began to speak. Her voice trembled with the weight of memory, her words carrying both sorrow and truth. "Okoro was once a man of honor," she said, eyes distant. "A night watchman who guarded this city when others slept. He was betrayed by greed, accused of stealing what he protected." The elders bowed their heads, shame clouding their faces. They buried him without a name, without a prayer, without peace. His soul lingered, waiting for justice that never came. She looked at Tamba, her voice now a whisper edged with warning. "When you mocked his resting place, you did not awaken his wrath. You awakened his sorrow." Tamba's throat tightened, the air around him suddenly heavy, his heart beating as though echoing Okoro's pain. By midnight, the living gathered at the edge of the cemetery. Auntie Chuma, Mama Kisa, and 3 city elders came carrying sacred water, white cloth, and salt, symbols of cleansing and purity. The moon hung low, watching with unease. Shadows stretched across the tombs, long and thin, as if the dead themselves were leaning closer to witness. The gates creaked open, and the smell of damp earth filled the air. Tamba followed behind, trembling, his breath visible even in the warm night. "Hold your courage," Auntie Chuma said softly, though her eyes betrayed her own fear. The city beyond seemed to sleep, but here in the graveyard, every sound carried weight. Every whisper felt alive. They formed a circle around the nameless grave. Auntie Chuma placed candles in the soil, their flames bending in the restless wind. The elders poured libations from a clay pot, murmuring prayers older than memory. Auntie Chuma's chant began low and steady, her voice weaving through the air like smoke. "Spirits of earth, spirits of air, let the wrong be righted. Let peace be restored." Tamba stood in the center of the circle, shivering. The earth beneath his bare feet felt alive, warm and pulsing as if it recognized him. Mama Kisa's tears fell silently as she clasped her hands in prayer, whispering, "Ancestors, protect my child." The chant rose higher, blending with the wind until it sounded like the voices of the forgotten joining in. When the clock struck 12, the ground stirred as though taking breath. A faint hiss escaped the earth, followed by the soft crackle of rising mist. The candles flickered violently, then went out one by one, swallowed by an unseen force. Auntie Chuma raised her arms, her eyes wide with awe and dread. "He comes," she said. The grave cracked open slightly, and from within, a pale light began to glow. Steam lifted like smoke from burning incense, shaping itself into the outline of a man. Okoro's spirit emerged, tall, translucent, draped in sorrow. His eyes burned with the dull fire of justice long denied. The air turned cold, smelling of rust and rain. The elders fell to their knees. Even Auntie Chuma's steady voice faltered. Then came the voice, deep, hollow, and heavy with pain. "You mocked my rest," it thundered, echoing through the cemetery. "You laughed at my silence." The sound struck Tamba's chest like a physical blow, forcing him back a step. Auntie Chuma's voice shook as she cried, "Kneel before him, child! Show remorse." But Tamba stood frozen, pride and terror fighting in his heart. "I meant no harm," he stammered, though his words sounded small against the roaring wind. The spirit's eyes glowed brighter. "You dishonored the earth that holds the dead. You poured scorn upon the innocent. Do you think laughter shields you from truth?" The ground rumbled, dust swirling around him like invisible chains. The wind howled, not wild but grieving. Then, as if the heavens themselves held their breath, the candles went out completely. The world fell silent. Even the crickets hid their song. Tamba's strength crumbled. He fell to his knees, his body shaking, his tears carving paths through the dust on his face. The spirit loomed above him, not in anger but in sorrow, its glow flickering like a dying flame. "Forgive me," Tamba cried, his voice breaking. "I was blind, foolish. I mocked what I did not understand." His words echoed through the graves, carried by the wind as if the dead were listening. Auntie Chuma bowed her head, whispering, "The proud must bow to be healed." The spirit's gaze softened, its sorrow greater than its rage. "The living forget too easily," it murmured. "But the earth remembers every deed, every word." Tamba pressed his forehead to the ground, sobbing. "I will make it right," he vowed. The mist began to thin, and Okoro's form shimmered, fading into the night. A single candle relit itself by the grave, steady and calm. Auntie Chuma lifted her eyes to it and whispered, "He has been heard." The city, for a moment, seemed to exhale, as though peace had been restored between the world of the living and the world of the dead. The air hung heavy, as if the spirits themselves waited for silence. Okoro's ghost stood still, his eyes no longer burning with rage, but glowing faintly, like dying embers before dawn. The earth beneath him shivered with the sound of a soft hum, an ancient rhythm older than men and gods. His lips moved, and his voice came out low and deep, like the wind speaking through the hollow of a calabash. "The living forget too easily," he said, his tone neither angry nor kind. "But the dead remember forever." His words rolled across the cemetery like a sacred chant, settling over every stone, every unmarked grave. The wind rose gently, curling around Tamba's trembling body. It was not cold anymore. It was soft, like a mother's embrace. He felt something break within him, something proud and foolish, something that had mocked the sacred. The mist began to fade. The once violent earth sighed as though relieved. The grave that had roared moments ago now rested, its steam rising faintly before vanishing into the quiet night. Auntie Chuma whispered a blessing under her breath, tracing the air with her wrinkled fingers. The spirits withdrew, leaving behind only peace. And in that peace, Tamba heard the truth his soul had refused to hear, that life and death were not enemies, but kin bound by remembrance. A flash of light tore through the stillness. It burst from Okoro's grave, flooding the night with blinding brilliance. The elders shielded their eyes. Tamba screamed, a cry that carried both terror and surrender. Then silence. His body fell, limp, dust rising around him. Auntie Chuma rushed forward, her voice trembling as she knelt beside him. "Tamba, child of Kesa, breathe! The ancestors are not your enemies." Her hands pressed against his chest, whispering prayers older than memory. The others joined her, forming a circle once more. But the spirit's light dimmed slowly, fading until only the scent of rain lingered, soft and clean. No one spoke. Even the night seemed to hold its breath. In that sacred pause, they understood. The boy had faced the weight of his sins and paid the price. Yet there was mercy in the silence, a forgiveness unspoken but deeply felt. When dawn arrived, its light was pale, almost shy. Tamba's eyelids fluttered open. The cemetery stretched before him, no longer wild or fearsome. Birds perched again on the gravestones, singing to the morning. The air was cool and alive. Auntie Chuma sat nearby, her tired eyes soft with relief. "You were spared," she murmured, touching his shoulder. "Not because you were strong, but because you finally listened." Tamba tried to speak, but only tears came. The earth that had terrified him now felt familiar, like home. The graves, once haunting, now seemed like guardians of a truth he had long ignored. He bowed his head in silence, his heart lighter than it had ever been. Days turned into weeks, but the echoes of that night never left him. Back home, he often woke at midnight hearing the faint whisper of Okoro's voice, not accusing but reminding. Every candle flicker made his chest tighten. Every gust of wind carried the weight of that graveyard's peace. Mama Kisa watched him quietly. She saw the sorrow behind his calmness, the humility that had replaced arrogance. Sometimes she feared he would forget, like all men do, but when she saw him kneel in prayer, gratitude filled her heart. Her son had died and been reborn in the same breath. In the city, people began to talk. The once loud Tamba, who mocked beggars and cursed the poor, now walked with a bowed head. He stopped drinking, stopped laughing at the misfortunes of others. The bar owners joked that a ghost had stolen his spirit. But his mother knew, It was not a ghost, it was wisdom. It was not a ghost, it was wisdom. Each weekend he walked with her to the cemetery. Together they cleaned forgotten graves, placing wildflowers where none had bloomed in years. He spoke softly to the wind, as though greeting old friends. At work, the other men noticed the change too. His laughter was gone, replaced by quiet words and patient hands. One day a coworker asked, "Tamba, did you meet death?" He smiled faintly. "I met truth," he said. And it looked a lot like death. The same hands that once disrespected the sacred now tended to it with care. The same mouth that mocked the poor now spoke blessings. And though he carried the memory of that night forever, it was not a curse. It was his redemption. The man who had once mocked the dead had become their guardian. The city woke each morning to a new version of Tamba, quieter, humbler, and filled with a strange calm that no one could explain. Gone were the loud laughs that once echoed through the streets. Gone were the careless words that wounded the hearts of others. In their place was a man who now walked with purpose, his steps soft, his eyes gentle. Every payday, he went to the cemetery with a small brown envelope in hand. The caretaker would look at him curiously and ask, "Another donation, Tamba?" He would nod with a faint smile. "Not donation, Baba, just a debt being paid." He bought flowers, bright red hibiscus and white lilies, and placed them on forgotten graves. He ordered marble plates for those who had been buried without names, whispering softly as each one was laid down, "You are remembered now. Sleep in peace." His mother, Mama Kisa, often watched from a distance, her heart swelling with pride. One evening she said, "My son, what you are doing is service to the unseen." But Tamba shook his head. "No, Mama, it is not service. It is a debt to peace, peace I once disturbed." Children who passed the graveyard began to call him Uncle Tamba, the keeper of silence. They would giggle as they watched him sweep the paths and wipe the tombstones, but deep down, even they felt something sacred in the way he moved, as though he was carrying a message from the world beyond. The same city that once whispered of his arrogance now spoke of his kindness. Shopkeepers greeted him with respect. Elders nodded when he passed, and the youth watched him in quiet wonder. Tamba had become more than a man. He was a living story, a lesson carved into time. As months rolled by, his story spread far beyond his street. In the evenings, under the old baobab tree, the elders would gather the young ones and begin, "There was once a man who mocked the dead," and the children would lean closer, eyes wide with both fear and fascination. The story was told again and again, how Tamba's pride had nearly cost him his soul, and how the spirits of the forgotten taught him the price of disrespect. "Do not mock what you do not understand," the elders would say, their voices deep like thunder rolling over distant hills. "The earth has eyes, and the dead have ears." One evening, as the sun dipped behind the cemetery and the wind hummed softly through the trees, a storyteller, the same voice that began this tale, spoke to a small crowd gathered by the graves. His tone was slow, rhythmic, like the beating of a drum in the heart of the village. "Respect the living," he said, his voice echoing across the fields. "But never forget the dead, for the earth remembers every step, every word, every drop." The wind carried those words across the city, into homes and markets, into hearts that had long forgotten humility. The story became more than memory. It became rhythm, a living wisdom passed from mouth to mouth, generation to generation. And in that rhythm, Tamba's name lived, not in shame, but in grace. One evening, as twilight spread its soft blanket over the graves, Tamba stood quietly at the edge of the cemetery. The air was cool and still, the scent of earth rising like prayer. He placed the last of his flowers on Okoro's grave, bowed his head, and turned to leave. But then the wind stirred, gentle, almost playful. It brushed against his cheek, carrying with it a faint warmth. He turned back. On Okoro's grave, a single candle flickered to life. Its flame danced slowly, neither fierce nor weak, glowing steady like the heart of forgiveness. Tamba froze, his breath catching in his chest. Then he smiled faintly and placed his hand over his heart. "Thank you," he whispered, "for teaching me how to see." He stood there for a long moment, watching the flame burn peacefully in the dusk. When he finally walked away, the candle remained, glowing softly through the night, as if the earth itself had forgiven him. And the city slept beneath that gentle light, its silence carrying one unspoken truth. Even the proudest heart can find peace when it learns to bow.